Hello and welcome. As you likely are already well aware, there's a vote set tomorrow on the $3 trillion HEROES Act. Now, many Republicans have shot down this proposal and will likely see changes and additions made before anything is passed, if anything does get passed. However, Republican Representative Pete King has said that he actually plans to vote in favor of the newly proposed bill tomorrow. I found this very interesting enough to make a video on it. King is a representative in New York, one of the hardest hit areas by the C-word epidemic. Now, King stated, and this is a quote, "Look, I disagree with a lot of the things that are in the bill. Some of the provisions in allowing illegal immigrants, some of the absentee ballots in the mail, all that stuff. But the fact is, to me, Mitch McConnell sort of laid it down. He's talking about no federal aid to state and local governments. New York is going to die. My county, Nassau County, and Suffolk County is also in my district. Not only are they running up tremendous costs, the revenue losses are unbelievable." So this is a representative of an area that absolutely understands what's going on with this epidemic. I mean, really, if anything, funds should be more targeted to areas that are more affected. That just makes logical sense. So he's seeing it through that lens of, hey, we need help right now. I'm willing to, set aside the things I don't like in order to just get help right now, which a good representative should do, despite which party they're in or things like that. They should be there for the people that they're representing. So this is something that McConnell has been talking about all along. He's been very against giving state governments funding, stating that they're using this epidemic to make up for their past financial issues, stating in the past he'd rather see states actually go bankrupt versus giving them additional funding to fix their previous problems. So this got me wondering, because I like to go down these little rabbit holes, how do state bankruptcies work? Because until he had brought it up, I've never heard of this before. And what is the history on, bankruptcies? Well, lucky for you, I did the research on this. So let's start way back in ancient times. The word bankruptcy didn't even exist. It was originally actually called debt slavery. So why was it called debt slavery, you ask? Well, if someone couldn't pay their debt, that person, their spouse, and their children would be forced into physical labor until the full debt was compensated for. Simpler times. In 1542, the term bankruptcy was introduced into English law for the first time. So here's the definition of bankruptcy in case you were wondering. Bankruptcy is the legal process through which people or other entities who cannot repay debts to creditors may seek relief in some or all of their debts. And believe it or not, there are actually many examples in history where entire states have gone bankrupt. In the 1840s, actually, a ton of states did, including Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Mississippi, and Florida, just to name a few. All had gone bankrupt. Majority of the state debt was owed to parties outside the United States, mainly Europe. And then this later led to the Bankruptcy Act of 1841, but then that act later got repealed. And if a state were to file for bankruptcy, it would technically be free of its obligations. However, looking into this some more, this actually might not even be possible in this day and age. In order for a state to declare bankruptcy in this day and age, two things would have to happen. The first thing, that is pretty improbable, Congress would have to pass legislation changing the actual bankruptcy code, allowing states to even file for bankruptcy. And then secondly, states would have to contradict the U.S. Constitution because states under the Constitution are barred from impairing the obligation of contracts. And in 1977, the Supreme Court interpreted that line as a state cannot refuse to meet its legitimate financial obligations simply because it would prefer to spend the money to promote public good rather than the private welfare of its creditors. And then on top of that, states are also considered sovereign entities, and because of that, they technically would be overseeing their own bankruptcy, and that simply wouldn't work either. So there's all sorts of problems with this, and in summary, will allowing states to file bankruptcy work? Probably not. It's way too complicated. Too many things would have to be passed. All these stars would have to align for that to even happen. And then the question still stands, is that even a good idea? Who knows, to be completely honest. So I'll be very interested to see how this vote plays out tomorrow. And I mean, if the vote even happens tomorrow. And it'll be really interesting because about 1/3 of the entire HEROES Act bill is covered for funding for state and local governments, almost $1 trillion of the $3 trillion bill. So, I mean, if that's wiped away, it's basically a whole different bill if that's not included. So back to Representative King, he stated that the bill should be used as a jumping off point to negotiate on a bill that both sides can agree on. Now that makes perfect sense to me. You take the parts that you like, take out the parts you don't like, mutually agree on something, maybe forget about the politics of the situation and just focus on the greater good in the short and long term. But I mean, that's kind of a pipe dream, but I think that this negotiation will only happen if the Senate agrees with more of the bill than they disagree with. Otherwise, negotiating on this bill will be harder than making an entirely new bill. So excuse this second rabbit hole that I'm about to go down, because this really comes down to how negotiations work. Let me give you an example. Think about how the process works when, let's say you're buying a car. And let's say you have a $9,000 budget to buy a car. So you find a seller who wants $10,000 for their car for sale. You still want to buy it for $9,000. If you're a decent negotiator, you aren't going to just offer $9,000 first right off the bat, because you know you're not going to land at $9,000. You might offer something like $8,000, do a little meet in the middle deal, or maybe even lower. Maybe you'll offer $7,000 and you'll be happy with $9,000, even if you go up 2/3 of the way. So this negotiation works when the price you're willing to pay is somewhat near the selling price. Now let's change this a little bit. And let's say your budget is $3,500 for a car. You can't pay more than $3,500. You almost certainly will be unsuccessful in attempting to buy a car for $3,500, negotiating it down from a sale price of $10,000. The other party just simply will not be able to mentally detach their self that far from that $10,000 sale price, which makes total sense if you just think of it intuitively, if you're selling something, things like that. Now, bringing it back to the bill, I foresee the same thing happening with this bill. If the Republicans are cool with something like 30% smaller than the bill that's proposed, they'll probably try to negotiate, maybe even 40% smaller. But if they're thinking something along the lines of 75% smaller, it's just going to be way too hard to negotiate that far down and the other party not be pissed and the public not to be mad about it. And it probably will just be easier for them to write up an entirely new bill to just reframe the offer and reframe the problem. That way there's a whole new point to negotiate off of instead of setting this high bar. That's just how I see it playing out, just based off of my knowledge of how negotiations work. All in all, we may see more Republicans supporting this bill as the vote goes through tomorrow and in the future. Whatever happens, I'll be sure to report it on this channel. So what do you guys think that will happen? Do you guys see a huge change? Do you see the bill passing similar to what it is, maybe 20% off? I'll be curious to see what exactly you think in the comments. Until next time, that's all I have for today. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.